The movie of the mind exercise overview and 7 steps. Most of the stories we tell ourselves are like the first chapter in a book or the opening scene of a movie. For example, in a movie, a bomb explodes and that's the opening scene, and that's the story that we keep replaying. Or in our own lives, a loved one dies. Or the opposite, right? Say a meadow is peaceful, right? That's the opening scene. But in the case of the meadow is peaceful, the person is unfulfilled, and that's the opening chapter of a book. The problem is, if that's the part of the story that we never move past, it's like watching the opening scene of a movie and not knowing how the rest of the movie ends, right? You've seen that part and the bomb explodes and you're like, wow, that's really messed up. And nothing else happens in the movie for you because that's where you keep going. You keep replaying that one part of the story over and over and over again. And you're like, but this has happened, this is real. And I'm like, yes, this is real. But if you never move past that, then you can't move past that. The problem is most people don't know how to change that, right? They would love to move past that chapter, move past that part of the movie. But a lot of people don't have the tools or skills because we're never taught how to move past that part of the story. And that's what the movie of the mind exercise does. It helps you move past that scene so that you no longer are stuck in that place and you can start to see the progression of that movie. And at the end of it, it becomes a completely different place for you. You've changed how you view that whole situation because you're able to complete that movie of your mind. So the essence of the movie of the mind exercise is this. You allow the full story without judging the story or the movie of your mind, however you want to think about it. A story like in a book or a movie of your mind that you're actually seeing in your head. And while you allow this movie to play in your head, you're learning the plot, right? You're starting to see the connections between things that you didn't realize were there. And by doing so, you can trust that at the end of this movie, there is a quote-unquote happy ending for you. 100% guaranteed, if you finish this movie, there will be a happy ending for you. Maybe not out in the real world, but in the movie of your mind, there will be. And your one responsibility with this movie of the mind exercise is to allow that to happen, to allow this story to be told. And when you're able to do that, when you're able to see the whole movie, when you're able to finish this story, you will feel different on the inside. You will see the whole situation, the original situation, that opening scene in a completely different light. And when you're able to do that, when you're able to see the original situation in a completely different light, then you have the ability to think of new and different possibilities of how you will act in that similar situation in the future. You leave this movie of the mind with a new insight, right? The person that started this movie is not the same person that ends it. And because you have that insight, you're able to see the world in a different way and therefore act in a different way. And so battles that you might have had internally because you've only been playing that opening scene over and over again, you're able to complete, and you see the movie, the whole situation in a different light, and you're able to act in a different way. And when that happens, a whole new world of possibilities opens up for you that have always been there, but that you might not have seen. This is often why we as a species are obsessed with stories, right? This is how we learn when we're small. We learn through stories. We don't learn through facts. And the things that are most impactful to us are stories. So when you can allow the story of yourself, of these different parts of yourself, these different storytellers within you to complete their stories, you give them a sense of purpose and rest. And you're able to see things in a completely different light, opening up new possibilities that, again, have always been there, but you might not have noticed them previously. So the thing is, we have so many stories that make up who we are. Think of just one role that you play in your life. It could be a work goal. And you have so many stories that hold up that work goal, right? Do you have to be on time? And if you aren't on time, what does that mean about you as a person? Those right there are a bunch of stories. Are you good at your job? Is your job your passion, or is job just something for money to come in, right? All of these are a bunch of stories, and that's just one aspect of one part of who you are. Often the problem is that a lot of these parts, these storytellers, they get stuck in time, right? They learned a lesson years ago. Maybe the first job you ever had, you learned that you had to do a thing a certain way. And ever since then, that story has created and been reinforced because that's what you believe. So that part of you has gotten stuck in time. And so if you want to move past that story so that you can create different aspects of your life. It's just sitting there waiting for you to be heard, so that these parts that have gotten stuck in time can tell their stories to you. And all they're asking is for you to sit with them so that they can complete the movie that they have within them, so that they can complete that story. And when you're able to hear this part, this storyteller's desires, all of their desires, without judgment, when you can learn, quote unquote, all about the plot points that this part has, you will change. And by doing so, you will awaken solutions that you might not have noticed previously. So the way to think of this movie of the mind exercise, this storytelling exercise, is to think of like a large dining room table. And at this dining room table, you have a quote unquote adult part of you. At the same table, you have a kids section, right? That's the younger parts of you that learned things when they were younger. And at the head of the table, there's this old, wise version of you that can see all of this and understand everything and knows that it can show any part empathy. And so all these parts of you, all these different parts of you have their own stories to tell. So they are all different storytellers within you. And they're all sitting there at one table. So sometimes at this table that lives within your mind, you have just one part that has a story to tell that you need to listen to. And by this part telling its story, it's creating a movie in your mind. So it's telling the story and you can start to see this movie. Same thing when you're reading, right? You're reading a fiction book and it's creating this world within you. So as the words on the page go into your mind, it's creating images that you are now creating in your own mind. And this is often why people prefer the books over movies, because the movie that they've had in their mind is better than anything that they've seen on screen. So here you have one part of you, one quote unquote storyteller that's taking you through its story. And this story that it's telling you is relatively straightforward, and it's taking you through the story, and you end up changed after hearing it. And more importantly than just hearing it, you are experiencing it, because it's changing who you are as you're listening to this story. This part, this storyteller is creating such a vivid image in your mind, this movie of the mind exercise, that by the end, it's gotten to the heart of you, right? It's touched your heart in a different way. And in doing so, it brings you an inner peace. You feel that inner peace. And at other times, you're starting with one part of you. One storyteller is telling its story, a young part of you. But then another part of you comes in, maybe a teenager part, and that part's like, yeah, but that's not real. That's not how it happened. And so in that situation, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to hand over to that other part that chimed in and was like, that's not real. Because they're going to need to tell their story before they allow the other part to finish its story. Otherwise, it's going to keep interjecting. And yet sometimes another part comes in and is like, but I don't feel safe with this. So this other part comes in and feels unsafe. And so for this part, again, you allow that part to speak, to say its fears and what it wants before allowing the original part to continue. And so when those other parts come in, you can imagine it just like you're sitting with friends or family, right? And a part comes in and is telling their story, and then someone else interjects, and we listen to this new person for a little while. But the key difference here is all these parts are within you, telling their stories. All versions of you. Younger versions, maybe even older versions. That doesn't generally happen, but it can. But usually it's younger versions of yourself telling their stories that got stuck in time. And so it's your job to listen to these stories, to know all the aspects of what it wants, to allow this part to continue that movie instead of just getting stuck in that opening scene over and over again. And by doing so, you allow this part, this storyteller, to finish its story. To finish a story that it's probably been trying to tell you for so long, been trying to protect you, but you haven't learned the lessons because you haven't sat with it, because either you've been scared or overwhelmed, or you feel like it isn't worth the time. But when you're able to complete that story, you have a different perspective and you feel different on the inside. And so you're able to overcome things that may have been holding you back for years simply by listening to it. And this is how you learn the stories of you. And your stories shape you more than almost any other aspect of who you currently are. We think it's our beliefs, we think it's the people that we surround ourselves with, But why do we have those beliefs, and why do we surround ourselves with certain people? It's because the stories that we have of ourselves tell us that this is what is quote unquote right. So this movie of the mind exercise gets to the heart of the stories of you. And it's a key tool to be able to change the different parts of you, to be able to change the actions that you take in a way that doesn't feel like it's a constant conflict. And by doing so, you feel better. With that said, in the next video, we're going to go through the 7 steps of the movie of the mind exercise. If you have any questions or comments for me, please feel free to let me know.